Hello,
Hello.
welcome back. It's been a 2 week hiatus, but we're back with footnote number 15. Uh, the date is December 9th, 2018. This is the first time I've announced that. But I'm happy to be back. I always miss these conversations, and I have this like need every time like Sunday rolls around. The cravings built up, and
Mm.
I need to share some events in my life. And here, June ran about psychedelics or
Mhm.
whatever is on his mind. So I'm glad to be back.
All right. It sounds like you've been conditioned for it.
Yeah, a lot of positive reinforcement here. Um,
All right. I'm gonna switch things up this week and ask
uh-oh.
you about how your week has been, Paul.
Oh
'Cause
my goodness. I
I,
was not ready for this.
I always get asked the question, and it always puts me on the spot. So, how was your
Wow.
week, Paul?
Um, this is a tough one. You see, this week has been a huge struggle. And it's been hard for me to like really operationalize why it's been so difficult. I'm sure studying has to do with it. There's like a baseline level of stress that's always present in medical school where you feel like you always have to do a little more day by day. But one of the things that really went well this week was I had a meeting with my counselor. So for those who don't know, and probably you don't know either, actually, I see a counselor once a month, and it's like you can go in for like a physical examination or like your monthly check-in. This is my mental check-in. And so I like to schedule one in every month. And this week we sort of talked about what makes me what makes me happy, essentially, or what makes me happy about being in medical school in particular.
Mhm.
So as you know, like in the past I've burnt out a few times and had some difficulty with studying and keeping up. And what I found was what we talked about was that I'm quite people driven. I need some sort of like feedback from others to make me feel good about myself, essentially. So when I'm learning like lecture material and I'm trying to cram all that information in, and I don't see any sort of feedback um, to the people that I'm helping or um, like patients that I interact with, then I just feel like it's pointless. And that's a tough thing to grapple with because I know in a higher level of functioning that I have to learn all this stuff eventually to help more people in the future. But in the immediate moment, um, I'm not able to help anyone out. I just don't know enough. So I think I'm trying to bridge that gap, make it stronger, that the connection between the present and the future, so that if I do the work now and focus on the present, then I can reliably trust myself to for it to pay back in the future, if that makes sense. And so I've been obsessed with this idea recently about building things. I
Mhm.
want to build something like a legacy, something to outlast me.
All right.
And I'm not sure yet how that's going to manifest. I really like the saying, Rome wasn't built in a day, mostly because I played Assassin's Creed and that was a really good experience. But I like that idea because I love that the fascination of building little by little every day, each and every day, and having it lead to something miraculous and huge later down the line. So I think what I'm trying to do, and this is along the line of something that we were talking about last week about prioritization. I just want to build like five things, you know? It's like build a family,
Uh-huh.
build a successful career, build a like something to do with musicals and singing. I haven't quite nailed these down, but I'd like to just build a few things and try to make all my experiences and the things I do revolve around those five things so that eventually I make something of significance. Because right now I just feel like I'm playing around with little Lego bricks, not really making anything massive. So yeah, that's been my week. It's just trying to reframe my mind to fit that new exciting phenomenon, I guess.
Mhm. So the first thing you mentioned, if you could break your week down, or the revelations from your week down, into two, it's that you're fundamentally people driven,
Hmm.
and the second is that you're motivated to build some things that'll outlive you and be really great to see down the line.
Hmm.
And the maybe the fundamental question in both of those seems to be something like, how are you going to connect that to your present experience, to your present moment? How do you let those things motivate you and guide your actions?
Oh, is this a question? Question? Is this a rhetorical question?
It's a question. It's a big
Okay.
question.
It is a huge question, uh, and I think it's a question that a lot of people struggle with, especially I think students, right? Um, because students have to do all this work, this schoolwork, finish tests and assignments all the time, and they're kind of worthless. They're sort of meaningless outside of, I guess, if you learn something from it, or you get good grades and you go to somewhere like another school or a job of your choice.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of young people probably struggle with that too. Is bridging that present to the future. And for me, it seems like that bridge has to do with making sure I'm helping people and I'm getting some sort of feedback from people and feeling so loved and great from it. So um, yeah, maybe a solution is finding a compromise between, okay, what is something that I can do that will make me feel good now and will also be helpful for me in the future, right?
Mhm.
And so I don't know. Like I could think of an example in medicine. Like I could do more experiential learning. I could go to more observerships, um, see patients firsthand, and try to apply the knowledge that I learned in class as best as possible. And I think that would be very helpful. The few observerships that I had, I think, have been very rewarding and have gotten me back on track. So
Mhm.
that's definitely something I can work on. I feel like you have some thoughts as well on that.
A little, just it reminds me of, I'm rereading a book called Mountains Beyond Mountains,
Hmm.
and it's about he's a worldwide famous physician, Dr. Paul Farmer. He started the charity Partners in Health. They're a worldwide, international nonprofit that delivers high quality healthcare in very low resource settings. And how he started essentially was, he was always closely connected to Haiti, or the people of Haiti. He had worked in some orange plantations, from what I remember from the book,
Okay.
really close to the Haitian people, and decided to go to Haiti and really see life in Haiti as it was. And also at the time, um, he started medical school and studies in anthropology at Harvard. But the thing is, he spent 9 out of the 12 months, of the year in Haiti, and no one said anything about that because he was also getting top grades in his class. And, and you have to wonder, like, all right, like, what kind of dude is this guy to be able to do all that? And I think a part of it is that, yeah, he was really exceptionally gifted. He had very high intelligence, really great memory, and he was really driven by a sense of compassion, um, that really is unparalleled. It seems like,
Hmm.
just reading his biography. Um, so it seems that there are really unconventional ways to achieve those kind of different goals, to satisfy both, um, the minimal requirements, let's say, for, let's say, passing classes, but also to fully immerse yourself in what you love. And it was probably the case that, because Paul Farmer was seeing so many cases in Haiti, and getting firsthand experience with all kinds of unimaginable conditions that you wouldn't see in the first world, that might have bettered his education,
Hmm.
much more than had he stayed in Harvard, and just stayed and just studied in Boston. So I'm really attracted to ideas like that, and I I don't think it's only for super exceptional people to live super exceptional lives. That's an idea I've been drawn to, and because otherwise you know, let's say the other path, let's say the more standard path is to, hey, Paul, just like suck it up for 2 years, or like 4 years or 10 years, and eventually you'll get to where you like. But I think you and I both know that that is a path like might be very miserable to take, and 10 years is a long time. So are there things that we can say, are there rules, are there kind of supposed to be's that we can say fuck you to, and so that we can spend our time as much as possible doing the things we love, or um, moving us in a direction that we genuinely think will improve our lives? That's kind of the question I've been working with.
I want to just comment because you said, are there rules that we can say fuck you to? Which I think is interesting that you bring in, is that there's like a system set in place that you could probably follow. Like, for example, like the medical school curriculum, but that doesn't necessarily lead to the best outcome. So is there certain rules that you've been trying to push the boundaries of? Are there things that you feel are restricting you at the moment?
That's an interesting question. I mean, one thing I've definitely said fuck you to since the beginning of the year is lectures. Lectures. Where the idea is that I have to study completely from scratch, from firsthand materials all the time. It seems like there's a wealth of materials that have been graciously passed down from upper years. It's called Med USB. It's a Google Drive. But it has notes for the cases that are well summarized and condensed. Now you can say, June, isn't that cheating? Are you cheating medical school? But from my perspective and the goals and aims I'm trying to achieve, where where does that harm anyone? Just because I'm not getting all my information and maybe spending 5 hours a day summarizing that into my own summary, will that make me a worse physician? Like, it might reduce my ability to, let's say, summarize really complex information into simpler ones. But if there's a better solution that doesn't seem to do real harm and doesn't set off my ethical radar, let's say, then I'm willing to take that route. As to other rules, I can say, fuck you too. Well, one thing is about taking a year off. I think there's something called an enrichment year that's reserved at MAC for generally like a year for research or a year for a master's program. But so me and another colleague of ours, Matt MacArthur, are applying for the Renaissance Award. And the premise of that award is you get to do just whatever you want as long as it's outside your field of study. If we get that award, we'll also be able to get the enrichment year. And so 4 months of the enrichment year will be spent doing whatever we want that's out of our course of study. But also it gives me that time to experiment and maybe engage in activities that I've always thought about doing, but maybe never pursued. So those are kind of the ways I'm thinking about tinkering with rules and conventions. And it's been an idea that's been planted in my mind maybe in the past week or two since I started saying fuck you as you remember.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what I've been thinking about.
Well, I'm not surprised that you feel that way. Because I remember in our undergrad, like there were times when you were, I guess, questioning of the things that were set in place, like lectures. I know you didn't like anatomy. I remember specifically. It wasn't taught in a very in a way that was conducive to your learning. Correct me if I'm wrong. Um, and yet you're in medical school, right? You're you're learning medicine. You're going to be learning anatomy at some point, and you're probably going to know most of the material that was taught in second year of our undergrad. So yeah, I find that fascinating, and maybe like you and I, goody two shoes boys. I feel like we've been following rules for quite a while, and we haven't caused a lot of trouble. Um, my mom actually starts to get worried nowadays because
Mhm.
Western is sort of like this party school, right?
Yeah,
Uh, it's known for being a party school, and for some reason, every time she like messages me, which is like bi-weekly or tri-weekly, or she calls me, I'm like at a party, and I'm doing something fun. Like,
yeah,
so she's a little worried about that, but my reasoning is if I don't have this kind of like method of relaxation or having a good time, like I'm not going to grow as a person if I'm just sitting around all day studying, right? Um, and this is something that I know a lot of people realized much early on,
hmm
but as we know, you and I are sort of late bloomers in this stage, with these kind of things. So at least we're doing it before our professional lives actually start. Like we're still in education, so we have a little bit of free time to explore these different ways to break the rules. But yeah, I'm also trying to figure out ways to better study, better understand, and like the goal is always to be a good physician, a good person. You never lose sight of that. But you do have to compromise some things that just don't work. So um, yeah, it's a process.
yeah. Just in terms of taking risks and things, I think there's no better time, like in your life for the rest of your life, probably, to be taking risks,
Hmm.
right? So if you want a family, eventually like find partners, have kids, settle down somewhere, have big investments, then we're severely restricted in our time and the amount of energy we can devote to something, or the amount of risk it can we can take, because the consequences aren't only for individually, but for maybe like a family, or like if you have a roster of patients, they're going to be affected.
Hmm.
So I really see this time as a time to experiment, to try things that are outside of convention, and to say just fuck it. I'm gonna do it. I'm not gonna be held back and restrained by these flimsy social rules. I've been reading a book called um, have you heard of the 4 Hour Work Week?
Hmm.
It's by Tim Ferriss. He's a very well known entrepreneur. Um, but there's some quotes I wanted to share. In the first chapter, it's the common sense rules of the real world are a fragile collection of socially reinforced illusions.
Hmm. He's
So
woke.
yeah, yeah. But no, yeah, woke actually woke is very interesting.
Okay.
The use of woke as a term
Uh-huh.
um, there, because I think you use that when you realize that the world isn't as you thought it was. And Tim Ferriss's version of woke is that a lot of the social norms and constraints in terms of how we interact with others, it's none of it is set in stone. Or in the case of his book, how we design and live our lives. None of that is set in stone. And so one of maybe the rules that we implicitly follow because everyone else has been following it and everyone else in our lives have been telling us to follow it is, okay, in order to make money, you need a profession. And with that profession, you work 9 to 5 for maybe 40, 50 years, and then you retire. And I think one of the reasons why that rule became so powerful was because it was so immensely successful in maybe the past 50, 60 years. But I think during times of, massive change and reorganization, we need to revisit those rules. Let's say the sacred cows, and we need to kill them.
Wow.
Kill them and test really whether or not they'll stand the test of experimentation and lived experience. So Tim Ferriss's solution, let's say his act of deviance from the 40-hour work week is to say, hey, like, what is the life I actually want to live? And how much is it going to cost me per week? So he breaks that down into cash flows. And then the next step is, okay, is there a way to generate that amount of cash flow? Let's say like $1,000 a week, without me having to labor for 40 hours. Can we cut it down to 4? Like it's extreme of optimization. And what the argument here is that in today's globalized day and age, where via the internet, we have instantaneous access to the world market, to the world of, one example he gives is automated services. What is that? So personal assistants that can help automate parts of your life, that can handle like your taxes and bills, and for businesses, invoicing for very little. All right, can we automate those? Can we eliminate those parts of our lives that can be replaced now? So he's tinkering with a lot of different rules, and I think he builds a very compelling case for the fact that yes, you can achieve whatever you would like to achieve, by working 4 or 5 hours a week, as long as you are really smart and intentional about your goals and the thing that you want to build. So I've been really engrossed by this book, and building a passive income stream that'll sustain me, even if I, let's say, completely flunk out of med school. That might be a goal I set, something I try if I'm given that enrichment year, and say, hey, are these rules really true? Like, can I test it? What happens if I push against it? Maybe I'll fail and I'll learn something great. All right. Well, I am blessed to be in medical school. Let's keep going down that road. Or I might say, wow, this works. the rules and social constraints we set for ourselves are really in some ways illusions. Sometimes useful illusions, but maybe they're being outdated now.
Well, yeah, I think that's an important point, the outdated part, because so I did a lot of reading when I was an undergrad, and in high school as well, about like ethics and all those like different rules of being, and I was so engrossed by them because I thought, if I follow these, I'm gonna be fine. Like I'm gonna be the most moral person possible. And then you apply that to like current situations in current society, and it doesn't always fall neatly into categories, and it doesn't always work out the way you think they do. So it's interesting because I think the 4-hour work week is going to be obsolete at some point. Like it's not going to work, and it also doesn't work for certain people already, right? So the 4-hour work week probably wouldn't work for someone who is like homeless or is working on minimum wage to support a family. Like it probably will not work for someone like that.
Right.
And they need a different set of ways of being, or different set of rules maybe, to be able to function and operate to the same extent that you would. And so it's adaptive.
Yeah.
I think so. Then the key really is to take a good account of your surroundings in the situation that you're in right now, and to ask yourself critically, what is the best way to make things work? And that's like a generic way to look at it. But given the certain circumstances and given what you have and your strengths and your skills, what will work? And that's like, I feel like that's the question of life, is what is going to work? What is going to make X happen, whatever X may be? And that could be like success, or money, or fame, status. It could be just propagating your genes. You just decide on a goal and you figure out what works. So, and that's still something that I'm working with as well. Like, I don't know, like every day, oh man, every day is a different day, and different things work. So I don't know, big questions, man, big questions.
And so, yeah, you're right. So people come from, let's say there's this huge bell curve. I think I'm echoing a little bit.
Let me move my mic here. How's that?
Yeah, it should be better. No, I still echo. Could you mute? All right, thanks. So yeah, you're right. There's this huge variability in people and the conditions of daily life we face, so that each person and what works for them is different. But in the whole, when we test things in the world, when we test out different ways of being, we kind of come across a limited number of things that seem to work, and we can call them rules, and those rules apply to us, and maybe they'll apply generally to people in circumstances or situations like us. But the danger with rules and what works is that it can make us stagnant, right? So if things are working and we don't really feel a need to explore and try to adopt other ways of being, other ways of working, then we can become, stagnant and inflexible, right? So, for example, had we stayed goody two shoes, because those are the rules that we learned. We should the rules that we learned. This is kind of meta. The rules that we learned are that we should play by the rules, and playing by the rules gets us rewarded, and getting rewarded from your parents, getting approval from your parents, from your teachers, and that will help you go to college and university and get a good job. And we've been very successful in those set of rules. But then, you come to this digital age, and you see people like Tim Ferriss, or maybe, let's say, people who have their own YouTube channels or blogs or whatever service, and they're just traveling the world. There seem to be a class of rule breakers, let's say, who have adapted to this new reality and have crafted their own new set of rules that can adapt. So I think the case I'm making is that yes, it's important to be aware of what works for us, but we also need to experiment with new sets of rules and ideas, so that we can be really positive deviants. And I think the cost of that can be very little. We don't have to take drastic actions in order to, let's say, we don't have to drop out of med school and just go to Haiti and I want to become Paul Farmer. No, those are too drastic. You can have mini experiments. Let's say, okay, is there a way for me to take a year off of school? I'm probably sure at Western there's a way to do that too, with probably minimal consequence, maybe other than maybe finances. But still, but still, what's the worst that can happen? You're still in medical school. You'll still have a very stable, maybe the most stable job or career. If you decide whatever you try to experiment with doesn't work. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say, I'm trying to build a case for you that if there's a time to take a risk, and if there's a time to be deviant and be shit disturbers, I think the time is now, or at least in this phase of life. And I don't want to, let's say, complete my life not having taken any of these risks. Although I'm very risk averse and risk, uh, but I don't think I will have led the kind of life that will lead to, the audience rising up for a standing ovation. Because as I told you in 2 weeks ago, that's the kind of life ideally I'd want to live, and that everyone should want to live.
Mm-hmm. I I just forgot. Sorry. Wow, I'm blanking here. It's so inspirational, you know. Oh yeah, the point that I wanted to make was I find it interesting that you say that you're risk averse when I feel like the most that I've explored outside of my rules often comes from conversations that I have with you in the sort of the few events that you've had where you did break the rules. Classic example is your trip to Niagara,
Yeah.
your bike trip to Niagara. That's still I'm still on my bucket list. I'll go to Toba Marie or something. You go south, I'll go north.
All right.
But yeah, I feel like you're drawn to that, and that you get a lot of you learn a lot from it, and you can take a lot from those experiences, which tells you something. But I guess what you're saying is you're risk averse in the sense that you enjoy stability, like you enjoy the comforts, and it's your normal mode of being.
Yeah.
And then when you want to like step out, you can take some risks as well. I actually want to make the case that any time really is a time for risk taking. So as long as it doesn't significantly impact someone else you care about. So like you can make the case right now that if you were to take risks like taking the year off of medical school, that it's going to affect your family. Like I don't know how your parents feel about it, if you even told your parents, but what they would say, what they would try to warn you about. I know for sure that my parents would question me a lot about my choices and try to convince me otherwise to take a break. But well, I guess it's not a break. It's doing something else in that time.
I have
So
another quote that's
yeah,
relevant.
go for it.
So the quote is, one of the rules, the new rules, is ask for forgiveness, not permission.
Yeah, I don't fully like that one, but
But so here's the
consent.
case.
What about consent?
Consent is important, but here's the case for it, right? Whenever you tell people that you're trying something new, that you're taking a risk, that you're doing something that's different from the norm,
Mm-hmm.
there's usually a lot of social inertia that's going to try to hold you back.
Mm.
And that's, very well intentioned. If my son came up to me one day and said, Dad, I'm going to take a bike trip to Niagara by myself and just figure things out as I go, as a father that's seen my little kid baby grow up from this like fetus to now, I'm going to be obviously concerned and express my concerns. So in those ways, in a lot of ways, there's going to be that social inertia that holds people back from trying new things. And I experienced this a lot, for example, with my ketogenic diet, right? I tell my parents, and my dad kind of laughs and sometimes tells me I should eat more. You should eat more diverse and balanced foods. I'm like, okay, Dad, I'll take that into consideration. But my mom is, very concerned. She'll get upset, like, well, why don't you eat rice? You can't eat those like ice cream and chocolates and all the things we used to love together, right? So in that way, by expressing just even if it's a very low risk experiment that I've been doing for 2 months, I can already feel the social inertia that's holding me back. So the point of this is for certain experiments that probably won't devastate your parents, that you think is worth taking, you should try it first, because then you won't have to worry about that social inertia, or you won't be held back by it. And when you try it out, you'll know for yourself whether it works or not. And so, you'll get a better sense of whether that inertia was valid. But if you don't try it first, you might not even get there in the first place. So I think that's a good rule. And I've also heard it in another lecture at McMaster. He was, I can't remember his name, but he was also a physician that was trying some really brilliant stuff. So I'm inspired to go down that path too.
I feel like people who say that though end up with good results. Like no one says, well, I feel like fewer people say ask for forgiveness and not permission when things go batshit crazy. Um, so I guess there's an element of like choosing your battles wisely, or making sure that when you do something, like you have a good idea of what it entails. I think that's something that we don't often talk about. Actually, is what are the actual costs of doing something, and what is the process like for appraising that cost before you take an action. So yeah, like what if one day you decided that you drop out of med school entirely and that it's not something for you, and you've decided that there's another career that you're interested in, and you're going to be so filled with meaning, and like it's going to make your life 10 times better, and then you do it and it turns out to be a sham, right? Like those kind of situations happen, and like things fall apart, right? So I know that kind of like dampens the mood a bit, but it's a definite reality. So how do you grapple with that? How do you make sure that that doesn't happen, or how do you make the best decisions or precautions to stop that from happening?
So two things. The first is you do rapid, low-cost experiments. So if you do have that inkling of a thought that, oh, maybe I should drop out of med school and go into business, and that will provide a fulfilling, that's a hypothesis. And you can test it in a way that doesn't cost much to you. For example, you could take a year off, let's say, or not even a year off, but during your summer, you can get your hand, like feet wet in some business idea, rapidly prototype it, try it out. And Tim Ferriss, like in his book, has very different ways of trying that out. So, for example, you want to sell a product, um, just compile an advertisement and put it on Google AdSense. You don't even have to have the product yet. Just put it out. Have a page for orders, and the demand that for the product is going to be how many orders people fill out. At the last minute, you say, "Oh, product whatever is delayed. We can't fulfill the shipment. Sorry." But and he's playing with some ethical rules maybe that some people might not be comfortable with playing around with. But the idea is, and that action costs something like $100, and maybe 1 day of your time, and that can be a rapid prototype to assess the demand for an entire online business, right? So there are rapid, low-cost experiments that can point you in the direction to say, is breaking this rule a good idea? Are there significant results that can come out of this? And I think there's, very many ways of trying that out. And if that data from your testing suggests that, yeah, there is a real opportunity here, maybe you might be inclined to take that risk. Maybe dropping out of med school, or not even dropping out of med school, let's say not applying to residency, seems like a viable option in that circumstance. So that's the first thing, in terms of how to manage risk. We chunk it down into smaller ones, and do low cost experiments. And the second thing about thinking about risks and consequences is to think about the worst possible scenario that can happen to us. So let's say tomorrow I drop out of medical school and decide to pursue a business, like a business idea. So what costs are that going to incur me? From the financial side, I will probably have around $12,000 of debt in my line of credit. That's like, I just revealed my financial situation. And loans from OSAP that I'll have to pay off. I probably won't be able to afford the rent that I'm paying in this house, so I'll probably be relocated to my parents' house or somewhere else. My parents really won't like me that much. Maybe they won't even feed me. Maybe they'll want to kick me out. My dad might beat me in the most loving way possible. My mom might refuse to feed me good food, or at least be less motivated to. But I know that they'll still love me, even though they think I'm a dumbass or something. Maybe my mom will experience some kind of social shame. Whatever. All right, those are big costs. Am I going to survive? Are there ways out of that? I could probably work a minimum wage job, and I might slave away for I don't know how many years, to pay off the loans, but I'll survive. I'll still have a home. I'll, like, even in the worst possible circumstance that can happen out of taking a risk, I'll be decent. I'll be okay. And that's one of the, in the book he mentions Seneca and Stoicism, or there's another philosopher during those times who voluntarily would expose himself to the worst possible conditions, would live like a homeless person, maybe once a year or for a week a year. And that really affirmed to him that living in the worst possible circumstance you could imagine, like, is not that bad. So that's not saying get yourself into a situation where you'll end up with the worst possible consequence. No, it's a thought experiment. It's a thought experiment that gets you to think about, conceptualize risk better. Because most often the problem with risk is not that it's very real. The biggest problem with risk is that we over magnify it, and it prevents us from taking the leaps and experiments that would really make our lives happier. So I think there's those two kind of thought experiments or real life experiments you can do, to get more comfortable with risk.
I want to say that I like the first one a lot, the rapid small experiments, but I also want to comment that both of those seem more like attitudinal changes, and it's not an actual, like, there's nothing that changes around you necessarily. It's just the way you perceive risk and the way you grapple with it changes, and so you're more likely to take that leap, or you're better equipped because you're more confident, or you're more comfortable with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also wonder what can be done about mitigating risk, that's actually palpable, that's tangible. And the only thing I can come up with is plan Bs or plan Cs or plan Ds. Like, it's to have alternatives along that route that you're going to take, so that you're not going to fall directly down, like down the pit. Like, you'll end up on a ledge somewhere on the side, and and be able to at least climb back up or not lose everything. What do you think about that idea?
I think it's a very good idea to have a plan B, C, D, because plan A probably there's a good likelihood that it won't work.
Right.
But,
so then, sorry, then risk and the highest risk, the highest perceived risk, as well as the highest perceived benefit, both are sort of out of proportion, so to say, right?
what do you mean by that?
As in, when you decide to take a riskful action, like initially you'll probably think, oh my God, this is going to be huge. This is going to have a huge impact on my life, either negative or positive. But eventually, like once you actually go through the motions, most often I feel like there's like a moderate sort of consequence that results from taking that action. So then I guess the plan Bs and plan Cs and plan Ds would be where that lies, I suppose. That moderate consequence. Does that make sense? The moderate outcome. That's a better way to put it, I think.
A moderate outcome. No.
Not clicking?
No.
Okay, well, it's something like this. So you're going to take a very high risk action. And your initial response is, okay, this is going to be a huge risk. And then you apply the principles that you had, which is, do the little mini experiments, test the waters a bit, imagine the worst possible consequence. And by doing so, you sort of mitigate the risk and say, oh, okay, well, that's going to be not as bad as I thought it was going to be. But then now you have this new level of excitement. It's like, okay, well, it's not going to be that bad. Maybe it's going to turn out to be amazing. Maybe the profit margin is going to be huge. I'm going to benefit so much from this. But if you don't have these plan Bs and Cs and Ds, you're probably not going to end up here. You're probably going to end up somewhere around the middle in the moderate range. Or rather, actually, that your plan Bs and Cs and Ds will be in that moderate range. Does that make sense? So it's sort of like a mitigating effect. You change your attitude so that the high risk doesn't seem as high as risk. And then you take your idealistic future and you mitigate that down to a palpable, more reasonable benefit margin, I guess.
Yeah. Yes, you need both. And I see what you're. So if I understand you correctly, you're saying that the act of planning the plan A's and B's and C's are a way of making those optimistic projections more realistic. And so you are reducing the margin of error on both risk and both perceived reward, so that you are more calibrated, let's say, or more finely attuned to reality. And I agree. Both are very good things. So I think Tim Ferriss also talks about that in his book. And the thing I wanted to bring up to you for us is that I think we have very excellent plan Bs and Cs and Ds. So like right now, my plan B, I could say, for example, that my plan B, oh, I'll just be a doctor. Wow. What a plan B, right?
Yeah.
Or plan C, I'll move home with my parents who have a nice home in Toronto. Like, what a plan C. Or plan D, I will be a nuisance to my friends and crash on their couches, maybe like how Elon Musk did after he sold PayPal, I think, and tried to start his new venture. Plan C. And maybe like plan Z for me is I actually end up homeless. So I think in those ways, when you consider what kind of plan B, C's, D's you have, you can become more realistic about your ability to take risks, and yeah, you can function better when you have that, both that security in mind and that sense of the risk I'm taking is not that big a deal.
Well, my question is like, yes, we do have these great plan Bs and Cs. Oh my God, I can't keep saying this, but do you ever really think about it as much as you think about the risk and mitigating the risk? You personally, and then maybe like you as society.
Do I do I think about the plan Bs and Cs as much as I think about like
the risks?
Yeah, I mean, like when I try to do something new, so let's say I want to start a online business and start selling shoes for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean the risks associated with that are going to be the first thing that pop into my head. Plan. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know. I can't quite frame the question.
Okay, yeah, like in terms of like what the significance of the question is, right? I guess it's more so like, what do we focus more on? Is it the risks? Because it seems like in Tim Ferriss's book, right? The idea is change your attitude so that you're not as afraid of taking these big risks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming that's like the main point. That's like the first point.
One of the first points. Yeah.
Right. So because that's the first thing that stops us is that fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
Less so, I feel like we think about the alternatives that we can take once we actually engage in that activity or take that risk. And I'm wondering if that's backwards. Like, is that order the wrong order? Should we be thinking about our alternative futures before we think about risk in the first place? Like, why would you ever be scared of taking risks if you have all these other plans in mind?
Well, you could do it both ways, like you said. It depends on the individual.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure some people have taken great risks, even without considering plan Bs, Cs, Ds, and it worked out well for them. In some cases, it doesn't. For us, I think we're fairly conservatively minded in terms of um, work and success, so that we've worked till this point to build, let's say, a kind of stability, a kind of plan B, kind of C. Um, so yeah, there's different approaches. I think you make a good point or a good case for having the plan Bs and Cs and considering those. And like you said, that might also help you be a little bit more unafraid.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the strange thing. So we have those plans Bs and Cs. So what are we scared about? What's holding us back?
Mm.
And you know, that can be a very personal question. You know, we're filled with all sorts of traumas and emotional tics and past experiences that kind of change the way our bodies work.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of make us shut down at times. But I think the process of working with those so that we can be as unrestrained as possible, I think that's what we should work towards.
Mm. Yeah. And I like the point that you said about that it's different per individual. Like I think it's heavily a personality thing to want to take risk. Like the risk averse behavior is heavily personality influence, I think. Yeah.
So what kind of risks do you want to take, Paul?
That's a good question. The first thing, I tried skipping lectures, like you, but what ended up happening was I didn't study on my own time, which was an issue. So I haven't actually properly done that risk the way that it's meant to be done. Um, So I'd like to figure out a better way to study for myself and on my own.
Mhm.
Another risk that I want to take is maybe trying to better connect with other people.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. Very recently, this is kind of a personal thing, but very recently, I was told that I'm like a guarded person,
Uh-huh.
which I thought was interesting because I think with some people, I'm very much like very open, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes that builds because the relation that happens because I build a relationship for a long time. Like you and I, like we've known each other for over 4 years, and um, we weren't like this when we started. Like it took us a few years. Um, so I guess I was kind of put off by that, and maybe I give the first impression that I'm like very guarded and walled off, and that might be it might put some people off. I don't know. I don't actually know what sort of effect that has on other people. I don't think I've necessarily felt that in others
Hmm.
in my life. Like I'm always open to having conversations with others, and if people are willing to share their ideas, like I'm always down to listen. So I've never felt like people are guarded. So it was interesting for me to hear that about myself. So I guess the risk that I would be taking is, you know, opening myself up or trying to like emulate what that would be like if a normal person or someone else were to open up. Like what does that really mean? Um, yeah, that's the one thing that's been on my mind recently, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, one actionable recommendation from like
Mm-hmm.
another good thing about how he structured the book is at the end of every chapter, there's a very small like experiment that you can do. Um, and he calls them comfort challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing is for the next 3 days, try to look people in the eye as much as possible until they turn their gaze away.
Okay.
And
That seems kind of like toxic masculinity. I'm kidding. Okay, what's the goal behind that?
I mean, it's a simple thing. Well, he recommends like even doing it for like people in the streets, just kind of like looking at them, looking into their eyes,
Okay.
because that's something that we feel, let's say, uncomfortable doing sometimes, or when we feel intimidated by someone, um,
Mm.
like oftentimes, like for example, you're staring at someone of the opposite gender and they're very attractive, and then they look at you, and then you go like, "Oh shit." I feel like that avoidance response is most immediate with our eyes.
Mm.
So maybe that's one way potentially to appear less guarded and to connect with people better is by
Maybe.
making more consistent eye contact.
Mm.
Maybe it's worth a try. And I doing this for the past 3 days, it's been cool.
Yeah. It,
Just
no one looks at you funny, like you're just like looking into their eyes and
no,
okay.
because I don't do this, but I'll try to look at their eyes as much as possible. And when they feel uncomfortable, they'll look away. And when they look away, they don't know that you're still looking at their eyes. So it doesn't really affect my conversations like in a way that makes them uncomfortable.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think it's a cool thing that I want to try to do more of. Um, but I was going to say a risk that I want to take
Hmm.
more of is not being afraid to be disagreeable or to piss people off a little bit because I find that like in some of my relationships, like because I'm very agreeable, people will roast me, let's say,
Mm.
and because I bear no teeth when they do that, it happens again and again, and then I get resentful. But one thing I could do is when they roast me in a direction that I don't appreciate, I'm like, "Hey man, why did you say that? Like, what do you mean by that?" because I don't think I've ever done that in my life, which is crazy to think about.
Mm,
But those are very small micro social risks that will hopefully help my psyche,
mm.
that will put me at ease when I come home at night and be like, I said fuck off to that person, fuck you. So that this disagreeable side of me can live itself out in the world.
So to clarify, it's not to make you an antisocial person or
Yeah.
some weird guy with intense eye contact. It's to get you comfortable with something that you don't usually do, right?
Yeah. And so it's expanding my, let's say, personality, social skill toolkit.
Mm.
And in the whole, getting more comfortable with taking small risks like that. So
Right. I think that's a good place to end it off. To whoever's listening, what risk would you take? What take this home? And it's a little
and who do you want to say fuck you to?
yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
And we hope to hear from you. We don't have you can email us at podcast.footnotes@gmail.com or just reach out to us. We're always here in our rooms.
Yes.
Anyway, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.